There's a Woody Allen movie, I don't remember which one it is, in which someone is going on and on about the movie as a real authority, and then it just so happens that the person who wrote it is right there and corrects him. And I actually just had this experience where my final concluding remark was sort of drawing on some work by Dr. Schnepp, who's just told me that, in fact, I've misinterpreted it. So, better that I beat you to the punch. And I thought about changing the conclusion, but it's still kind of interesting and provocative. So I'll just go on note right now as saying that I'm already pushing the envelope a little bit on my final conclusions, and now I know even more so now. So that's my first caveat. The second caveat is that, as I said, I really don't know much at all about dyslexia, except as I've been listening to these talks, I'm beginning to suspect that I may be a self-dyslexic myself, so I may know more than I thought I did. All right, so what I'd like to do today is to talk to you about mind wandering and its relationship to creativity. And I'm going to do an attempt at the beginning and end to tie it in with dyslexia. So there is a relationship between ADHD and dyslexia. It's estimated that about 30% of those with dyslexia also have coexisting ADHD. And what I'm going to be telling you about with respect to mind wandering is very related to ADHD. It's well known that one of the sort of defining characteristics of ADHD is distractibility, and mind wandering is clearly a major aspect of that. And it's also known that ADHD has been associated with creativity, so there's that connection as well. So the questions of my talk today is, what is the relationship between mind wandering and creativity? And this may speak to a source of creativity of at least a significant minority of people with dyslexia. And I think it's really interesting to think about. There may be other mechanisms by which dyslexia is connected with creativity as well. So this may be one of perhaps several different routes by which dyslexia enables creativity. So let's begin with some anecdotal discussion. There are numerous examples in over history of individuals who report having had creative ideas while mind wandering. There is the classic example of Archimedes, who was trying to figure out how to calculate the volume of the king's crown without melting it, and was sitting in his bathtub, and as he was sort of idly, as the legend goes, mind-wandering about it, he suddenly realized that by putting the crown in water through displacement, he could calculate the volume, and then he had this eureka experience where, legend goes, he ran through the streets of Athens naked in his exuberation. There is also the famous example, well, maybe less famous than Archimedes, but still well known among at least us creativity researchers, of Poincaré, the famous French mathematician who was stepping on a bus, and as he put it, at the moment when I put my foot on the step, the idea came to me without anything in my former thought seeming to have paved the way for it, that the transformation that I used to find Fuchsian functions were identical with those in non-Euclidean geometry. So there's major insight while mind-wandering stepping on a bus. Just a couple of other examples. Kary Mullis, the inventor of DNA replication, apparently, on one Friday night in April 1983, while driving to his weekend cabin, Mullis has recorded it, suddenly struck him that there was a method of producing unlimited copies of DNA fragments simply and in vitro. And this has proved to be hugely important in terms of the study of DNA, because you can only study by being able to replicate it. All sorts of advantages have been made possible. And then lastly, Townes' invention of the laser. Apparently, the idea for the laser beam dawned upon physicist Charles Townes while he was sitting on a park bench in Washington, D.C., admiring the azaleas. He suddenly realized how light could be configured into a very pure form. So a lot of examples of people just sort of thinking idly, and suddenly very creative ideas occur to them. So major discoveries seem to occur when people have been working on a problem for a while and then take a break. Solution occurs while mind wandering during the break, and this is also, and I'll be coming back to this as well, and this is also an exciting part of Mark Beeman's research, seems to be associated with an aha experience. So there seems to be sort of this connection, perhaps, between mind-wandering, creativity, and the aha experience. So those are sort of the key ideas that I hope you can hold in your mind, unless you're mind-wandering. So the goals of the present research that I want to tell you about today first is to examine the relationship between mind-wandering and creative incubation in the laboratory, first off. Then to assess the relationship between individual differences in mind-wandering, creativity, and aha experiences. So looking at, are people who are inclined towards mind-wandering, do they have a different relationship to creativity? And then thirdly, and this is unpublished research, and also where I'll be pushing the envelope a little bit too far, I suspect, to explore the role of mind-wandering and aha experiences in the actual output of creative individuals, screenwriters, and physicists. This is work you haven't heard about. All right, so here we go. Mind-wandering and incubation. So in this study, we are interested in investigating the degree to which the benefits of an incubation interval in creative problem solving stem from the opportunity for mind-wandering. So just to sort of bring this back to you guys, you've all had the experience of you're trying to solve a problem and you go, I need to sleep on it, right? I just need to just let my mind sleep on it and I'll come back to it. And this has been studied in research. What happens when you've been working on a problem and you take a break? And what we were interested in this study is if we fill that break with different activities, what does that do to the value of the break? So we directly compared incubation of varying levels of difficulty, so they're doing different things. And it's been shown that when people are engaging in a very demanding task, they mind wander, not surprisingly, less when they engage in a less demanding task. And so we thought if we give people sort of just the right amount, sort of the Goldilocks, just the right amount of demand to their incubation interval, this might particularly spur on creative ideas. We used a technique known as the unusual uses test, where you ask people to come up with as many uses as they can think of for a common everyday object, such as a brick or a hanger. Okay, so this is the way this paradigm worked. People were given the opportunity to come up with as many unusual uses as they could for a hanger and for a screwdriver, or we had a number of different items, but those were two of them. Then they were given a demanding task. They had a rest task in which they were simply asked to just sit there idly and given nothing to do. And then they were given no break. And our hypothesis was that this non-demanding task, where you're still sort of doing something but not a very demanding thing, might actually produce the greatest value, because this is where you sort of are stirring the pot. You're thinking, but you're coming back, and you're thinking, you're coming back. And then they were given another set of unusual uses. So if they had if they had the hanger and screwdriver, they get those again. But they also were given new items, and this allowed us to look at the benefit of the incubation interval on both items they had been working on before and new items. Okay, so what we're doing is we're giving people creativity tasks. We're giving them an opportunity to mind wander at various different levels. Then we're giving them the items they worked on before and new items, and we want to see where do they get the best benefit. And what we found is that it was the undemanding task, the zero-back task, that led to the most substantial benefit between time 1 and time 2 in solving the items that they'd worked on before. So the items that they worked on before, where they'd already been percolating in there, when they were given the opportunity to mind wander, that led to the biggest benefit. Interestingly, rest, just giving them nothing to do, and this is somewhat surprising, you might have thought, well, they do even more mind-wandering when they're just sitting there doing nothing. But it seems like if you give people a mildly demanding task, this may be the sort of the perfect mixture of something to do but not so much to do that you stir the pot and get the most creative benefits. We did not see any difference for the new items, so this seemed to be specifically a benefit for incubation. So the conclusions then from this study is first that incubation effects are enhanced when individuals are given a non-demanding task relative to a demanding task, no task or no break, and we found that they mind wandered more during the non-demanding task than when they were given the demanding task. Secondly, the non-demanding task was associated with, that's what I said, with greater mind wandering. And this suggests that mind wandering during non-demanding tasks may particularly enhance creative incubation. So this means that if you want to solve a problem and you're stumped, you may want to do something like gardening or the dishes, something that doesn't really require a lot of thought. Okay, so this next study looked at individual differences in mind wandering. As I mentioned, there's some research that's been done already showing that ADHD, which is known to be associated with mind wandering, can be also associated with increased levels of creativity. Some studies have found that people with ADHD score higher on creativity tests, and other studies have shown that people with ADHD score higher in creative areas such as music, visual arts, culinary, invention, and writing. Also, there's been some evidence suggesting that that individuals who score high on creative achievement questionnaire are associated with insightful solutions, but not a non-insightful creative solution. So there's sort of a suggestion that creativity may be especially associated with having insightful kinds of solutions to things. And so our prediction then was that people high in mind wandering may be particularly creative, but that this may be especially associated to insightful solutions. So we're predicting a relationship between creativity and mind wandering, and that people who mind wander may be particularly likely to solve creative problems in an insightful way. So in this study, individuals were given various measures of mind wandering. This scale known as the MAS scale, Mindfulness Questionnaire, which is, I'll show you some of the items on it. It's negatively correlated with mind wandering. ADHD scale, they were given a reading task and another task, a vigilance task, and we looked at mind wandering on those various different measures. And then we gave them the remote associate task, which is very close, I guess, is your task basically closely aligned to the task that Dr. Beeman is going to be telling you about. Basically what happens is you give people, I don't think I have an example, but you give people 3 words, all of which have a common associate, and people have to come up with the word that is related to all 3 of those other words. This is the MAS scale, so you can see a lot of these items are very close to mind wandering. I find it difficult to stay focused on what's happening in the present. I tend to walk quickly to get where I'm going without paying attention to where what I experience along the way. Let's see. I drive places on automatic pilot and then wonder why I went there. I find myself preoccupied with the future or the past. I find myself doing things without paying attention. So closely related to mind wandering. And this is a very busy thing, so let me just walk you through it here. This is people's measure on the MAS scale, which we're using as a measure of mind wandering. And what you can see here is that their accuracy on the rat ones that they solved without insight, there's no correlation. But the more mindful they were, so this is usually mindfulness is a good thing, but in this particular study, the higher they scored on the mindfulness scale, the less high, the less well they did in solving rats insightfully. So this suggests that there may be a relationship between mind wandering and the tendency to solve creative problems in an insightful manner. So the conclusions from this study is first, the performance of the remote associates was negatively related to mindfulness, but only for insightfully solved problems. And this suggests then that mind wandering and insight may involve complementary processes. Okay, so now this last study, this is a work that we've just completed, so we're still writing it up. And we looked here at the real-time creative ideas of 2 different populations of creative individuals, physicists and creative writers. We had 45 physicists and 53 writers, and every day for 2 weeks, they completed a creativity journal where they were asked if they'd had any creative ideas that day. I'll tell you about it more in a moment. But basically asked if they had any creative ideas that day and the context surrounding those ideas and how creative they thought they were. The physicists were from a very highly selective workshop that happens at UCSB. UCSB has a really stellar physics department. And the writers were members of the Writer Guild. They were only eligible if they spent 20 hours per week or more writing on writing-related concepts. Many of them were screenwriters, novelists, and so some of their creative ideas would be like, oh, that's how I can kill this guy. In this case, they're killing off their character, nothing more. We asked them, first, did you have any ideas today that you think might represent a meaningful advance on any project that you're currently working on? Yes or no? We assessed the occurrence of mind wandering. We had two different questions that tapped this. First, what were you thinking about when the idea occurred to you? I was absorbed in the general idea or problem, so that would be on task. Or I was thinking about something unrelated to the general idea or problem, so that would count as mind wandering. And then we also asked them, what were you doing when the idea occurred to you, actively pursuing the project, working on another work-related problem, project, or idea, doing something unrelated to work, e.g. paying a bill. So either this, doing something unrelated, or this was defined as mind wandering. And then we also asked them, was the idea insight? We got at that in two different ways. One of the characteristics of insights is that they typically involve overcoming an impasse. So we asked them, what was the state of the problem that you had an idea about? And if they said I'd been in an impasse, that would suggest that it was an insight. And then we also asked them just, would you say this felt like an aha moment? And just asked them to indicate yes or no on that. Okay, and then lastly, we asked them the quality of the idea, how important do you think it is, how significant do you think it is, how confident, and most critically, how creative do you think it is. The other thing that we did, which was kind of fun, is we contacted them again 6 months later. And we said, hey, remember that idea? Or do you remember that idea? Whatever happened to that? Was it sticky? So we could actually look at what happens over time to these ideas and ask those same questions over time. Okay, so what did we find? First off, we had very good compliance. We had number of days completed, 100, so about 13 out of the 14 days people actually did it, so this is really a good pop. Our undergraduates are rarely this diligent. On 783 of those days, 62% they had an idea that they were rating. So these guys, they're coming up with ideas, about 8 ideas per person. And when did the ideas occur? So about 28% of the ideas said they were thinking about something unrelated to the general idea or problem. And about 28% doing something unrelated to work, e.g. paying a bill. And when you combine those two, 42% was either one or the other of these definitions. So nearly 40% of the ideas that these people are having were arguably occurring during mind wandering. So we think that's a pretty exciting finding right there, is that a lot of these ideas are not happening when people are at their desk working on the problem. They're happening at some moment of mind wandering. What was the nature of the idea? About 13% involve overcoming an impasse, and about so that's the key aspect of that one. And then here, about 45% were described as an aha moment. So they're having a fair bit of aha ideas as well. The quality of the is the function of mind wandering. So what were you thinking about when you had the idea? I was absorbed in the general idea of problem is not mind wandering. So we're actually defining mind wandering now as both of these. So that slide is actually incorrect. We're now, either one of those we're counting as mind wandering. So in terms of the quality of the ideas as a function of mind wandering, there was no difference in the overall creativity. So the ideas that they had when they were mind wandering were no more nor no less creative than the ideas that they had when they said they were on task. But they were nearly twice as likely to report overcoming an impasse when they were mind wandering relative to when they were on task. So when they were mind wandering, they're more likely to have an idea that they characterize as overcoming an impasse. And when they're mind wandering, they're more likely to describe the experience as an aha experience. So there does seem to be qualitative differences between the ideas that they have when they're mind wandering versus the ideas that they have when they're actually on task. There were no differences between the writers and the physicists in the relationship with mind wandering, but relative to the physicists, the writers were more likely to report ideas that were mind wandering, more likely to characterize their ideas as involving aha, and they thought they were more creative than the physicists did. Now, the key question is what happened, let's see, in the 6-month follow-up. So now let's just pause here and think about this for a moment, because you can actually tell two different stories. On one story, if you are mind wandering, I've already said that mind wandering seems to be associated with more aha, and that mind wandering seems to be associated with creativity. So you might predict that when you are mind wandering and you have an aha experience, that's going to be the real zinger. That's going to be the one that's going to really stick. And 6 months later, yeah, that's when I came up with this big discovery, like, you know, the laser and those other ones. On the other hand, it's also possible that you could get confused about how significant your idea is when you're mind wandering. When you're mind wandering, you're not expecting to have an idea. And then so all of a sudden this idea pops into your mind. You go, wow, oh, where did that come from? That must be a brilliant idea. So you could also sort of imagine that mind wandering would lead you to something which we've talked about before, is discovery misattribution, where you're feeling surprised and you're actually confused about why you're surprised. You think you're surprised because this is a great idea. In fact, you're surprised because you just weren't expecting to have an idea right then. So those are the two ideas. One possibility is that you've got this mind wandering enhancing the aha experience, a really good idea. The other possibility, discovery misattribution. What do we find? Well, it actually turns out we found both things. So, let's see if I can. So we contacted them 6 months later, and why? There we are. Okay, so this is kind of a busy thing. But let's first take a look at the writers. So here we have the writers, and these are the writers when they reported themselves being on task, and here are the writers right here when they said they were an aha. And what you basically see is that 6 months later, if they said it wasn't an aha, then they were more creative 6 months later. And if they said it was an aha, it was they were less creative. And if this happened when they were mind wandering, it was extra bad. So basically, when writers have aha experiences, and especially when they're having mind wandering, it's not that predictive of it being a good idea. If anything, that's probably not the way to kill the guy, right? That's probably not going to go anywhere. But interestingly, now let's take a look at the physicists. When the physicists were not mind wandering, they tended to when they to characterize it as not aha, those ideas tended to be better than the aha ideas. But look, of all the ideas, the ones that improve the most are the physicists who are mind wandering and describe their ideas as aha. So it seems to be that at least in certain fields, when you have an aha during mind wandering, it seems to be a really valuable thing. Now, we can speculate about why this would be. One reasonable thing is that in physics, it's a little bit easier to decide the idea. You have some knowledge about exactly how the current state of the field works, and it's a more sort of constrained in terms of evaluating ideas. Where in writing, it's very hard to know whether or not that idea is really going to work or not. So there may be differences in the degree of constraints in the two areas that mean that the aha ideas are going to be more likely to be genuine ahas in physics and relative to writing, and that they're really able to come up with the doozies when they're mind wandering. So physicists, whereas writers, rating of the creativity of their aha ideas decreased more than those ideas that were generated in mind wandering. For physicists, ratings of the creativity of their aha ideas actually increased when they originally occurred during mind wandering. Okay, so in sum, approximately 40% of creative ideas occurred when individuals were mind wandering. Compared to on task, these ideas during mind wandering were comparably creative, associated with more of an aha experience, more likely to involve overcoming an impasse. This suggests that mind wandering may be an important part of the creative process, especially for incubation, insight, and breaking impasses. However, after a 6-month follow-up, no overall differences in creativity on the tasks, but what we find is that creativity of aha ideas during mind wandering went down for writers and went up for physicists. So general conclusions: anecdotal reports of the role of mind wandering in creative discovery supported by empirical research. Laboratory studies show that mind wandering can facilitate creative incubation. Individual difference studies show that people who are high in mind wandering tend to have particularly more creative ideas that are of aha nature. And the journal study shows that 40% of creative ideas occur during mind wandering, more likely to overcome an impasse, more likely to be aha, but this can be a sign that an idea will go far for physicists or will fade for writers. All right, some speculative speculations, including one that is just become obsolete, but oh well. Mind wandering is a common trait of people with this. So here I'm trying to bring it back. I'm stretching, so right, forgive me. So mind wandering is a common trait of people with dyslexia, and it enhances creativity. So the speculation is that mind wandering may be a particular source of creativity for dyslexics. That seems not too much of a stretch. Mind wandering is associated with aha types of creative solutions. So the speculation then is that dyslexics may be especially prone to these aha types of solutions. That also seems to be not that much of a stretch. This is the one which is a stretch. The value of aha ideas that happen during mind wandering are especially likely to increase with time for physicists. Dyslexia is common among physicists. I've now been told that it may not be any more common for physicists than writers, so this kind of ruins that one. But so the speculation, which we're no longer buying, is that dyslexics may be especially prone to have aha ideas during mind wandering whose value grow rather than fade with time. And this may be the case perhaps in certain disciplines. Well, I hope you paid attention, but if you didn't, if you were mind wandering, I hope you had your next big idea. Thank you very much.